to get recycled. So we're going to talk a little bit later about mixed material items like lined paper cartons and like, you know, different alloys that are kind of bonded together. One of the reasons why those aren't recyclable in Vermont are because there's just not the technology at the MRF for them to get recycled. And then next is if there's a buyer. So if there's a buyer for something to be recycled, there's a good chance that it will be recycled. So if there's someone that really wants to buy recycled plastic and put it in their, you know, shoes or different materials, then there's a good chance that there's going to be the demand for it to be recycled, or even for that technology to be pushed for it to be recycled later down the line. And then the economics makes work for the processor. So if it's going to be really, really, really expensive for the plant to recycle the materials, and it just doesn't make economic sense to make something out of recycled materials, it's likely not going to be recycled. But if the economics are there, then, you know, there's a good chance that there might even become a market for things later down the line, or there might be now. And then demand for recycled products. So if there is high demand for recycled, you know, cotton t-shirts or recycled plastics and films and that kind of thing, there's a good chance that it could be recycled down the line. So these are the reasons why things get recycled. It's not just because, you know, we like to be green and we want to recycle things, which is, you know, a good thing. And, you know, it's Earth Day and that's great, but there are a lot of economic reasons. And Cassandra's going to talk about that a lot more later. All right, now we're going to go through each one of the 6 materials that I mentioned that are landfill banned and talk a little bit about how you can recycle them better. So the first category is paper. So paper is essentially any sort of paper that's going to come into your home for the most part. So this includes office paper and printer paper, glossy papers, kind of like, you know, the junk mail that you get sometimes. It's really shiny. That's glossy paper, junk mail, like I said, envelopes, inserts in magazines and the magazines themselves. Box board that's like the cereal boxes are fine. Any sort of boxes that maybe you got food out of are all paper that can be recycled. The things that can't be recycled are anything that's really wet or moldy. That's not going to be recyclable. It's going to become contamination down the line. Hardcover books are not recyclable in the state that they're at because you can't recycle the cover because it's too many different materials, but you can slice the pages out if you want and recycle those separately in your blue bin. You just can't put the cover in your blue bin. And that's also a good place for donation, is donating your books. And then the big area of paper that you should keep out is lined papers. So papers that are lined with plastic or wax. Commonly, this is something that has like a liquid in it. So like a almond milk carton or a Tetra Pak that holds some soup or something like that. That should not be going in your blue bin. And then one area we just wanted to mention was you're going to see that picture over the side there. It has some shredded paper in there. You can put shredded paper in your blue bin, but you want to put it in a clear plastic bag and you want to tie it. And make sure that's clear, because if it's not clear, the people that are working at the MRF are just not going to know what's in it and it's just going to get tossed. All right, so we're going to move on to cardboard. Cardboard is overall pretty easy. It's any sort of packing boxes or just corrugated cardboard. You can put pizza boxes in your recycling bin, that's fine. Just make sure they're not totally like drenched in cheese and sauce and toppings, because then it becomes wet and, you know, it's going to get moldy and that kind of thing. So just remove like any sort of lining paper and then you can recycle your pizza box. Again, just don't recycle any sort of waxed or plastic lined cardboard like produce boxes or that kind of thing that actually has like a film that you can see. All right, and then the biggest area that we really like to tell people to recycle is aluminum. So aluminum is, you know, any sort of aluminum containers or cans. And why that is because aluminum is virtually completely recyclable over and over and over again, mostly indefinitely. And the refinery process for aluminum is actually very, very energy intensive. So if we can recycle it as much as we possibly can, it's really a good thing that we can do for the environment and for the people that have to mine the aluminum. So mostly aluminum cans is a big one, but you can also recycle things like aluminum trays that you might have food in, and aluminum foil. So aluminum foil, you just want to make sure it's clean and dry, and then collect as much as you can from either like wrapping things up, or chocolate wrappers or yogurt lids are all recyclables too. You can put that with your foil and just get enough so you can ball it up to about the size of a tennis ball, and then it can go right in your blue bin. And this brings in a good rule when it comes to recycling. Anything that you recycle, you want to make sure that it's larger than 2 inches or by 2 inches and smaller than 2 feet by 2 feet if it's going to go in your bin. So yeah, if it's smaller than that, it's just going to fall through the cracks of the recycling plant. It's going to become contamination. All right, so then steel containers. So steel containers or steel food containers, pretty much food grade cans, anything that might contain like fish or meat or, just steel cans. And one of the areas that we like to tell people to make sure when you're cleaning recyclables is like fish cans, like sardine cans, because they can typically have kind of an oily film on them. And that can actually become something that can contaminate the recycling process. So we get asked a lot about how much you should clean recyclables. And the answer is kind of, try to get as much food off as you can. It doesn't have to be totally like sanitized clean, but typically a good rinse off and a little bit of a scrub is typically good. But if it's like a peanut butter can or a peanut butter jar or a oily fish can, give it a little bit of a scrub, make sure that as much of the food residue is off as possible. And there's a list there of any sort of the things that shouldn't go in, and typically it's the scrap metal things and the household hazardous waste containers that we're going to talk about later. All right, and then glass. So glass is glass containers like glass jars that you would have gotten like jam or something out of, or pickles, bottles, wine bottles, beer bottles, etc., etc. Any color is fine. You can go right in your blue bin. You just want to make sure that it's clean and dry. You're going to see the picture over there with the liquid in there. Don't put that in your blue bin like that. Make sure that it's emptied out and it has any sort of like mixed material lids taken off. So try to take any metal lids off of your glass bottle so that it's just glass when it's going in there. You want to make sure whenever you're recycling, it's just one material that's going in there at a time. All right, and then hard plastics. So hard plastics is one that people have a lot of questions with when they're recycling plastics. And what we like to tell people is just make sure that it's a hard plastic container. So, and that doesn't just have to be in the, the kitchen area of your house. Any sort of hard plastic containers are pretty much fine. So laundry detergent bottles, dish soap bottles, milk jugs, water bottles, plastic trays are all considered hard plastics. And you can actually leave the lids on your bottles. Just make sure that you give them a good rinse out and a good shake. Make sure they're clean and dry on the inside. And then you can put the lids back on. And that's a good way to make sure that they're recycled, because typically they're too small to go through the MRF just as they are. And then some exceptions to plastics are like the green bottle up there with the skull and crossbones. That indicates that it's a hazardous waste container. You don't want to put those in your recycling bin. Small caps and items that are smaller than 2 inches by 2 inches shouldn't be going in your recycling bin. And that actually includes the 2 inch by 2 inch rule, includes things like plastic straws and plastic forks, just because they're too thin. They're thinner than 2 inches. So 2 inches by 2 inches is like a 2 inch square. Styrofoam is not recyclable in Vermont. Plastic films and bags cannot be recycled in your blue bin, but we're going to talk about that a lot more later. Plastic peanut butter jars that are like covered with just kind of indicates like a dirty container. Don't be putting in like, a jar that's completely covered with peanut butter on the inside. You want to make sure that's cleaned out. Then the last area we're going to talk about just briefly is black plastics. They're not recyclable in Vermont just because there's not a market for them, and Sandra's going to talk about that a lot more later. All right.
All right. Thanks, Amanda. That was a really good overview of what goes in the bin. And first of all, I just want to say a few people joined us while Amanda was talking. Welcome. We had introduced the Universal Recycling Law in Vermont. and we were just going through exactly what recyclables are banned from the landfill in Vermont, and that's what that list was. I wanted to also just let folks know that I have muted everybody and not allowed videos, but that's temporary. When we get to our Q&A section at the end, we'll change that. But just for now, to keep it easy to run the slideshow, I muted folks. So please don't be offended by that. We'll try to be more interactive later. Okay, so back to recycling. So what everything Amanda just describes is what goes in your bin. Everything else doesn't go in your bin. And if it goes in your bin, if it's not on that list, it's contamination. And I'll talk about why that's a problem in a little bit. So if you have something you're not sure about, and I'm going to use this little glass jar as an example, just because it happens to be on my desk. I don't know if you can see it. It's a candle. There's still some wax in it. Honestly, I've actually been saving it because I'm going to reuse it and make another candle out of it. But I'm going to use this as our example as we go through. So if you're not sure, like, can this thing go in? Let's go through this little flow chart, and you'll get this in your follow-up email as well. So is it paper or a container? Whoops. It is either paper or a container. Yes, it's a container. It's a glass jar. So I'm going to keep going down the green. If the answer was no, then you would go to nope, doesn't go in your recycling bin. Now, not going in your recycling bin doesn't necessarily mean it's trash, but if you can reuse something, then or have another use for it, then it doesn't have to be trash. But if it is trash, it's better off as trash than becoming contamination in your recycling. Okay, so yes, it's a container, it's not paper. And I just want to point out, if it was paper, it says, is it all paper? That means, is it only paper? You know, Amanda was talking about, we can't recycle things that are multiple materials. Like Tetra Pak is a great example. Those, you know, like coconut milk or soup boxes, those are actually multiple materials bonded together. There's foil, plastic, paper. So we don't have an outlet for that in Vermont because it requires sophisticated machinery to separate those materials for recycling. So is it only paper, cardboard? And no, it's not paper, but yes, it's a container, it's a glass. So I'm going to keep going down the list. Is it bigger than 2 inches by 2 inches and smaller than 2 feet by 2 feet? I'd have to get my measuring tape out. This one's close. I think it is bigger than 2 inches. That means 2 inches on 2 dimensions. So this is a little more than 2 inches across, and it's a little more than 2 inches tall. It's close though. Some things like pill bottles often don't meet that criteria, and then those can't go in your bin. So then, is it clean and dry? And that is no, it's not clean and dry. It's dry, but it has wax in it. So it can't go in my recycling bin. If I melt the wax out of it or do something else, and then it could go in the bin. So that's just an exercise in, you know, how to think about it if you're not sure. If you're not sure, ask yourself those questions. Is it a paper? Is it either paper or a container? If it's a container, is it one of those materials, aluminum, steel, glass, or hard plastic? And then we need to make sure it's within the size range and it's clean and dry. Okay, we're going to take a break here. Do we have any questions coming in the chat box, Amanda? And if not, this is a good place for questions. Otherwise, we're going to go on and start talking about contamination.
We don't have any questions yet.
Okay, I'm going to keep going, and just put your questions in the chat box if you get any while we're going. So now we're going to go into what really happens when you recycle. And this is the kind of thing people ask us a lot. And we actually added this section. This is new on Earth Day today, because there's been so much national news that is making people believe that recycling isn't really happening, that you might as well throw it away. And that's actually not true. It may be in different parts of the country, but actually what's happening right now is recycling markets are on the upswing. We're sort of in the early end of the upswing, so you may not have heard the news about it yet, but they're coming up. And it's also depends on what region you're in the country. So in Vermont, we never stopped recycling, even when China stopped taking recyclables, because we weren't marketing overseas. We had domestic markets. And because of, you know, I'm sure I'm just referring to what I assume you all know, but a few years ago, China stopped taking recyclables from the United States because of contamination problems, really, really bad contamination problems. So that wasn't a market that we were tapped into in Vermont. We had domestic markets. Since then, those domestic markets have been strengthened. They're growing. The existing ones are growing, and there's new ones coming on, and there's demand for recycled materials. So just remember what Amanda said earlier, that little chart she had that said, what makes something recyclable? Well, you know, recycling's a business. So it's got to have the economics. It's got to be economical for the producer. It's got to have a buyer. And I can't remember the fourth one now, but you just remember that it's a business. And this is just an example of the tipping floor at the materials recovery facility in Chittenden County, where our recyclables go. Literally, trucks come in and dump everything out onto this floor, and this guy in this machine scoops it up onto a conveyor belt, and it gets sorted. And you know, the Chittenden Solid Waste District and Casella, which runs the MRF, and Chittenden owns the MRF, they invest quite a bit of time, money, and energy in sorting your recyclables. This is a person sorting. So they have a conveyor belt where humans sort out contamination, but then it goes through this amazing Willy Wonka style system where there's blowers and magnets and all kinds of things that separate paper, plastic, glass, metals, all of that. And it takes a lot of time and energy to do it. So they're doing it because your recyclables are raw materials that go back into manufacturing, and they have value. And the goal is to have non-contaminated, high quality materials. High quality means it's one material. If a buyer at a recycling plant, let's say they're a paper recycling plant, wants recycled paper for their product, they want as little contamination as possible. So the less contamination, the higher quality. That's the goal. And so you can see here, these are bales of paper, and in the back, there's cardboard there. The other thing is that, you know, just to reiterate, and I won't go into this further, but it's recyclable if there's a buyer. It's a business. So if your materials are going into your bin and somebody is hauling them away, they're getting recycled because it costs money to manage it, and it costs money to sort it, and that money is made back when the materials are sold and turned back into new products. I'm not going to dwell on this slide. It just, you know, reminds us that we're sort of investing in the North American processors and recyclers because, you know, we have to know that we have a strong domestic market. We kind of blew it by sending a lot of contaminated stuff overseas. And finally, it's important to know that most materials that you recycle are actually recycled in the sense that they're broken down and remanufactured into new materials. That isn't the case for everything all the time. And this is an example of glass, which you may have heard about. Glass is a really tricky material because the markets for actually recycling glass, meaning breaking it, melting it down, turning it back into a glass bottle, are hard, and they're not there, or they're rare. And the way that we recycle in single stream recycling, where we're mixing everything together, including different colors of glass, and there's a little piece of paper and plastic mixed in with the glass, that makes it a pretty contaminated product. So it's hard to recycle it, but it does get reused. And this is an example of what glass looks like after it's gone through the MRF. It gets crushed and it turns into this product called aggregate. It basically looks like sand, but you can see the little pieces of glass in there. And so the Chittenden Solid Waste District will sell that to companies that use it for road fill or civil engineering projects. And then if that market's not there, it might go to 2M in Canada and get turned into recycled glass fiber insulation. So there are markets for glass, but there's not a lot of money in them. And finally, we included this slide, and this will be the last about the business of recycling, but I wanted to show you what I mean when I say there's a value in the recycling. This is a little bit of a, you know, it's only one part of the puzzle here. We're only looking at the revenue side of the recycling, not the expense side. So we're not seeing the bottom line, but this is the revenue that recyclables brought into the Chittenden Solid Waste District from their MRF in fiscal year 20. And you can see it's a little bit all over the map. Cardboard obviously was doing pretty well in terms of bringing in the most money. I'm not I didn't show, this is from one of their presentations. That's why the style looks a little different. I'm not including, they had a side, they also had a slide that showed the volume, I mean, sorry, the amount of material they take in by weight. So this is also a little divorced from, you know, you're not seeing how much they actually take in, but just to give you a snapshot, there's actual dollars connected to your recycling. Nobody's going to go through the process of collecting, sorting, baling, and shipping it if they don't have a chart like this afterward. And just as a little side note, I want to point out these 4 bars here are all plastic: PET, HDPE, natural and colored, and mixed plastics. Those combined are all your hard plastic recycling that Amanda was talking about. They all have different markets. And you can see mixed paper was not doing well that year, but again, markets fluctuate. So even if they lost money on mixed paper that year, that doesn't mean they're going to keep losing money on it. So they keep collecting it because the market will rebound. Okay, we're going to continue on, talk about contamination, and we have another question break after this section. So now that you know that what is supposed to go in your bin, and that recycling is really about the fact that it's a business, and with that, and it has to have a buyer on the other end, and it has to be uncontaminated. What do we mean by when we say contaminated? And just to like hammer home the issue one more time, contamination is anything in your bin that is not on the list of mandated recyclables. And Amanda just went through that list. And you could say, what about this thing, and what about that thing? If it's not on the list, keep it out of your bin. Even if we all hate to throw things in the landfill, throw it out if you're not sure, because it's worse if it becomes contamination at the MRF. Now, your one thing that doesn't belong in the bin isn't going to stop a whole load from getting recycled, but if everybody does that, it does become problematic. And then the other thing that's contamination is anything that can be problematic at the MRF. So this is an example of what happens when plastic bags and textiles go in your recycling. They some of the rules that sound confusing, they're there because these machines at the MRF can't handle certain things. So the plastic bags, it's pretty common at MRFs all over the world. Plastic bags will tangle up the machinery, then they have to shut it down, and somebody has to crawl in there and cut it out. Would you like that job? I mean, to me, that looks like the worst job. I can think of worse jobs, but it looks pretty dangerous. It's also extremely costly to shut down a whole facility for an hour or more to take care of this job. So that's why there's a lot of emphasis on keeping plastic bags out of your recycling bin. If you're bagging your recyclables, you should stop that. They just go loose in the bin. You don't need the bag, and the bag is contamination. So these are some more common contaminants. We talked about tanglers. So those plastic bags are called tanglers. You can see why they tangle in the machinery. Textiles like clothing sometimes ends up in the bin, also a tangler. Hoses, even those don't go in your bin. And actually, I don't know of any recycling outlet for hoses. If you have a hose that's so bad that you can't use it, it unfortunately does go in the landfill. Anything smaller than 2 inches by 2 inches, like those loose bottle caps we talked about. And then here's a few other common things that end up in your bin, like disposable coffee cups. That's on the list because it's an example of one of those things that is actually multiple materials bonded together. A disposable coffee cup might look like it's paper or box board, but it's actually paper and plastic. And I actually wish I saved a picture of it, but I found on the side of the road one day when I was out walking, I found a disposable coffee cup that someone had thrown out of their car window, and it had broken down over the window, and you could see really clearly like the broken down paper, and then there was this like plastic liner that had separated from the paper. Soiled paper plates, tissues, napkins, and paper towels. None of those go in your bin. Paper, anything with food on it, any food contaminated items stay out of your bin. And paper plates you can't wash. So the soiled paper plates, tissues, napkins, and paper towels. If you're a composter and these are uncoated with no plastic in them, those could go in your compost bin. But otherwise they would go in the trash. Black plastic. So Amanda mentioned that, and the reason that's a contaminant and doesn't go in the bin is because that's actually a material that the dye in black plastics contaminates all the other plastics. So you can't get multiple different colors of plastics or a clear. And they don't have a way to separate out the black plastics. It's not, there's just technologically, they don't have that at our MRF in Vermont. There's more technologically advanced MRFs, but not here in Vermont. And also the volume of black plastics is like a very small volume. It's less than 1% of what they take in. So that would be like, in my world, I find black plastics on like rotisserie chicken. If you ever buy that from the supermarket, that's often got a black plastic base. A lot of the takeout, if you get takeout, like our Chinese food we get usually comes with a black plastic base, sushi trays, that kind of thing. And it can't be recycled. So if you're not going to reuse it, it goes in the trash. So your options are, you know, you could be really extreme and not use it at all. Or you could talk to the people, like if you're getting your rotisserie chicken from the grocery store, you could ask them to look for a different colored and explain why. And whenever you speak up as a consumer, it really does affect things, even if you don't see a result instantly. Finally, batteries and electronics. We have a section later on about that, but I want to bring it up here too. Batteries and electronics are hazardous. They can cause fires, or batteries can cause fires, or electronics have a lot of heavy metals. And if they end up in either recycling or the landfill, they can actually be extremely hazardous to the people working there. Okay, so why do we care about contamination? Well, for one thing, it devalues materials. It costs money to deal with, and markets do fluctuate. So, you know, some markets might accept some level of contamination this year, they might not next year. So we just want to be educated about keeping it out. And then finally, I want to show you this photo. So this is from a field trip we took at the district a couple of years ago to the West Rock paper mill. It's a Vermont paper mill in Sheldon. They their product is 100% recycled content box board, and they use that for things like, you might recognize the name brands that buy their box board. It's like name brand spaghetti, a lot of name brand food products you see on the shelves, and they make these giant, like 12-foot in diameter rolls of box board and sell them to producers. This picture here is all the contamination they had pulled the day we happened to be there. It looks like pulp, and the reason it looks like pulp is because they pull the contamination out in the pulping process, but it's actually little bits of plastic and things that have mixed in with the paper and the cardboard that they're recycling. So they have a method for getting that out, and all of that has to go to the landfill. They end up spending hundreds of dollars every, you know, I don't know if it's a week or a day, but it's a huge amount of money on landfilling the contamination in their product. And then the other thing that happens, if you get like a waxed, you know, those waxed cardboard boxes Amanda mentioned, something like that, that actually can contaminate an entire roll. And those rolls are massive. So a whole like run of their box board, they might have to throw out if somebody puts a waxed cardboard in. So contamination really makes a difference in the product. The other thing is the contamination in the form of batteries, especially lithium ion batteries, can cause fires, and they're serious and they're dangerous. I'm specifically referring to lithium ion batteries because those have become ubiquitous. They're in everything. I have this weird little thing. Has anybody ever seen one of these? It's actually a lighter. It's chargeable. It has a lithium ion battery, and it's used for just like lighting candles and stuff. I mean, they have smart diapers that have batteries in them now. Vaping devices that they're designed so you can't take the batteries out. All of those things end up in recycling bins, even though they don't belong there. And if those batteries get damaged, they spark fires, and the fires run very hot, and they can take a very long time to put out. And these headlines are all different fires that have happened in the last few years in our region. This happened a couple times at Chittenden Solid Waste District. This headline here, the Tioga County Recycling Facility, that was some kind of a battery. I think they thought it was a cell phone. That fire burned for 3 days, and thankfully nobody was hurt, but the entire recycling center was burned to the ground. So you can imagine how devastating that is financially. But that's why it's so important to keep batteries out of the recycling bin and the trash. And in a little bit, Amanda's actually going to give you some resources for what you can do with batteries. So basically, we wanted to tell you all this detail so you would pay attention in your bin. If anything, you can do anything for Earth Day, it's just pay attention. And I realize recycling is sort of like, you know, the low hanging fruit in terms of, you know, paying attention to the environment and sustainability, but it does require, you know, some thought. And just like anything else around environmentalism, it works because of the economics, and the economics require that they only get those certain materials. So know the rules. Just remember, if it's smaller than 2 inches by 2 inches or larger than 2 feet by 2 feet, it doesn't work for the sorting facility. It has to be clean and dry. You don't have to go nuts with clean and dry. It doesn't have to be sanitized. You don't have to put your stuff through the dishwasher. And it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to blow it with air. I mean, it can be like a couple drops left in the container, but we don't want sloshing liquid. No bags, textiles, and remember, don't bag your recyclables. Those should be loose in the bin. And if in doubt, throw it out. Okay, that was a lot in one section. Amanda, have some questions come in?
We do have some questions.
Okay.
All right, so I think we can just swap these back and forth probably.
Sure.
If you want to take the first one. So the first one is, can a container that is recyclable but smaller than 2 inches by 2 inches go inside a larger container made from the same material?
That's a good question. People ask that. I'm going to go ahead and say no, because it's just what's going to happen when it gets to the MRF is if they, you know, maybe you could sneak it in, but it's likely that when those folks are sorting on the line at the MRF, they're fast. They get the equivalent of like one recycling bin worth of material. They get like, I don't know, I think it was 14 of those a minute is about the volume of what goes by on the line. So I think it's very likely your material will just get chucked as contamination because they don't have time to look at it and make sure it's the right material. I did hear recently about a person doing an art project where she's actually has these jugs and she's having people stuff them with those kinds of things that can't be recycled, and then she's using them as a building material. So
yeah, they do that a lot in like other countries too. I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's pretty neat actually, but it's so it's like a reuse kind of option rather than a recycling option.
All right. Then the next question, I'll take this one. So all types of caps are not recyclable, right? So the caps is just a sizing issue. So if it's smaller than 2 inches by 2 inches, it's just going to fall through the cracks in the machinery. And like I said before, if you have like a plastic bottle and a plastic cap, you can clean out the container and put that cap right back on there. Like metal caps and bottle caps, they can be recycled, but they have to be brought to like scrap metal recyclers and that kind of thing. So they are recyclable. Mostly caps are just a sizing issue.
Yeah, and you can put, if your metal caps are wider in diameter than 2 inches, those can go in the bin. Yeah. But I just learned recently you can replace metal caps on your bottles, but I'm not sure how that works. It's a little odd. Any more questions?
Yep, we've got like 4.
Okay.
All right, so the next one is, I separate my paper feed bags into 3 parts, and if there's a paper liner, I remove that. It's also clean. Why wouldn't it be recyclable?
If you're separating it, you know, into its component parts, then sure, you can recycle. Like if you pull the plastic liner out, there's no reason you can't recycle the paper. We're just not assuming everyone's going to go to those lengths. I would do that. I bet Amanda does that. I've even gone to the length of separating out the plastic liner on some of the those like cardboard takeout containers sometimes have a plastic liner on the inside. So yeah, go for it. If you can separate the materials, that's just something that not everyone's going to do.
All right. And then the next one was, why can't pill bottles be recycled? And again, that one's just a sizing issue. So if you've got the really small ones, you know, the ones that are like, you know, like quarter sized or something like that, those are the ones that can't be recycled just because they're going to fall through the cracks. If you've got the really big ones, those are fine. Yeah. All right.
Let's do one last question and then we should move
One
on.
more and then we'll take the rest later. So concerning caps on plastic lids, i.e. peanut butter lids, I understand that plastic used is more expensive to make, so I've been separating them and putting them in a clear bag to be sent to recycling. Is this okay to do?
Separating caps and putting them in a clear bag?
Yeah.
Yeah, they won't get recycled, they'll get thrown out.
Yeah.
You're better off just putting them back on the bottle.
All right.
All right, we'll take the rest of the questions.
Yeah, and a lot of them I think I'm going to cover anyways. So, all right. All right, so this next section is about different type of recycling that does not necessarily go in your blue bin. It shouldn't be going in there because it's going to be contamination, but that does have a good way of recycling. That's pretty easy. So the first one we're going to talk about is special recycling, and then we're going to go on to talk about our facility, the ARC, a little bit, and Barry. Then we're going to talk about plastic bag and film recycling, and then I'm just going to mention briefly some lifestyle changes that you might be able to do. So special recycling, when we talk about that in Vermont, we're talking about what's called EPR, which is extended producer responsibility. Sometimes it's also mentioned as product stewardship. So what this is it's like different regulations and legislation that has been put through that has producers of certain products, they pay like a tax or something on it that essentially pays for the recycling process to occur, at least a good chunk of it. And this means that for the consumer, when they bring it to be recycled at these specific locations, there's normally no upfront cost. So there is different materials that can be recycled in this way throughout the state. And I want to mention that the reason why these exist is because all of these materials, when they are landfilled, are really toxic if they end up in there, and they can be really dangerous. So the first one's paint and batteries, fluorescent light bulbs, and that's because they have mercury in them. Electronics such as televisions and computers, also like computer peripherals such as like keyboards and mice and printers, mercury containing devices such as thermostats and thermometers and sensors. So there's a way that you can figure out where to bring these. And typically it's at a point of purchase. So typically it's like at a hardware store, like a, like Ace Hardware or something like that. And each one of these has a different website that you can go to, and you go to the website and it'll have a place where you can plug in your zip code, or you can plug in your city, and you just type it in, and then it'll give you all the different places that accept those materials throughout the state, or, throughout, your 50-mile radius or whatever it is from where you live. And each one of these has a different website, but then also the DEC has a website too, and you can go on that and it'll give you a little bit more information about product stewardship, and also all of these websites are actually accessible there. And you'll get this link later as well. All right, so now we're just going to talk a little bit about our facility in Barry, the ARC, which stands for the Additional Recyclables Collection Center. So at the ARC, we take a lot of different difficult to recycle materials, and we have a list that is updated periodically. And we ask that before you go there, you go onto our website and see if there's any sorts of procedural changes, or if anything on the list has changed, because that list does change periodically due to markets. We try to keep it as consistent as we can, but every so often things are added onto there or they're taken off of there. And that's just because, as Cassandra said, recycling is a business. Sometimes there's fluctuations in it. So we're going to talk about a couple of rules when it comes to coming to the ARC. So the ARC used to be an entirely self-sort facility. Since COVID and that kind of thing, it's not as much anymore. You're going to drive up and then someone's going to meet you, and you might have to wait a little bit, but they're going to end up sorting your materials for you. But it really does help if you kind of put like items together. So if you put all your batteries together, if you put all of your electronics together, and that just kind of helps the process go a little bit quicker. And then prepare your materials beforehand. So things like pellet bags, which are made out of like a plastic film, they need to be cut down the side, and then the bottom needs to be cut off. And that's just so that any sort of contamination that's inside of them is going to fall out. And then lithium ion batteries, like I've got one right here. Grandmother wants me to recycle a cell phone, so I took it out for her. But they've got little terminals on the end, and if you just put like a piece of tacking tape or some duct tape over the end like that, it's going to help it become a lot less dangerous, because if there's two of these batteries and they kind of hit together, they can spark and it can actually cause things like fires and things like that. So it makes it a lot safer to process. And then again, make sure that you're only bringing what's on the list that we take. So again, it's on our website and we update it when there are changes. And just make sure you're only bringing what's on that list. And we do have, you know, like I said before, the website that has all the guidelines and everything you need to know before you go there. We're actually working on developing a short presentation on the ARC as well. So that'll be coming out in a few months probably. All right, and then plastic bags and films. So we've talked a lot about how you shouldn't be putting plastic bags or films in your blue bin recycling. That doesn't mean that there's not a recycling outlet for it. Actually, plastic bags and films are a really sought after product in the recycling because they can be made into sort of composite lumber that they use to make like park benches and picnic tables and playgrounds and that kind of thing. And if it's a really clean, you know, product, there's actually, I think, a company, what is it, TREX or something, yeah, that makes them. And it is a sought after product. You just need to make sure that you're recycling it in the right way. So a lot of times where you will bring it to be dropped off is at like a grocery store. They typically have like a barrel. And a lot of times they might think that you can only put plastic bags in there, but you can put all sorts of plastic films. They're all made out of the same material virtually. And that includes plastic bags. It includes kind of plastic overwrap that might be over paper towels or things like that. Bread bags, the plastic that goes over the top of water bottles. And if you want to figure out whether or not that can go in there, it's kind of opaque and it's pretty stretchy. So that includes things like air pillows. If you pop all the air pillows, that's plastic film. I think there was a question about that, like plastic Ziploc bags and other packaging bags. If you clean them out really well, that's plastic film. And if you go to that website at the bottom, plasticfilmrecycling.org, it'll give you a lot of information about plastic film, what is plastic film, and also will give you a place to put a zip code. So you can go and look up where you can bring your plastic film recycling. And then I just want to mention briefly reuse and kind of some ideas about how you can reduce your waste. So if you're having kind of thoughts about how, you know, you wish things could be recycled and you don't like maybe the way that the glass is being recycled, not into brand new products and things like that, a good way to at least extend the life of these projects is just to reuse them. I will collect like my glass jars and I use them for storage. I know like when I was growing up, my mother always had the little jam jars and we'd use those as glasses. There's lots of different options to reuse things over and over again. Also, you know, try to replace things with items that maybe last a little bit longer. So like in Vermont, we have the plastic dog ban that occurred with, you know, Act 148. So most people, I think, now bring their own cloth bags to the store, and that's a really good replacement for these disposable bags. And there's lots of other replacements that you can do. And we actually did a whole webinar on swaps and how to do a little bit more zero waste shopping that we did a couple months ago. That's on our YouTube, and we're actually going to do it again in June. So yeah. All right, now we're going to take questions.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I always get a little off on the Prezi. Okay, I'm gonna also, I realized I forgot when I first started the presentation. I'm gonna throw into the webinar, we have two surveys we asked folks to take, the pre-survey and the post-survey. I'm not sure if folks saw the email I sent out this afternoon that had a survey to take before you joined the webinar. I'm not sure if it makes sense to do that now, but I will throw in the post-webinar survey, and you will get a link. Actually, Amanda, I don't know why I'm not seeing the chat box. So maybe you should throw that in.
Okay.
I can't see it at all to see the questions. Oh, here it is. I don't know what that was about. Okay. you go ahead and start asking the questions, and I'm going to grab that survey link. Yeah, you guys might see me going to it. Sorry about that. Go ahead and start asking the questions.
So the first couple questions we had, I'm going to kind of link together because they're about plastic film recycling, and I think I covered this, but it says, first one is, what about the plastic bags from King Arthur Flour? They aren't solid, but they say they can be recycled. And then the next one is, so I'm guessing air-filled plastic bubble wrap, like the air pillows, is a tangler, even though it has a number 4 on it. So that kind of comes along to like, those are like different types of plastic film recycling. Both of those can be recycled in plastic film recycling. Just make sure that they're clean and make sure that if you have air-filled bubble wrap that you're popping, the bubbles, if they're enormous, big air pillows. Those can go in plastic film recycling, but unfortunately, just because something has a number on it does not necessarily mean that it can be recycled. And that's kind of why we've moved on from talking about numbers to talking about just plastic as containers, rigid hard containers. Did you want to add anything else on that, Cassandra?
Yeah, sorry, I'm all over the map. Sorry about that. Are you still seeing my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So on the air pillows, the question is, are they tanglers or? Yeah. No, because they don't go in your bin.
Yeah.
Would be tanglers if they went in your bin. But the thing that I want to bring up is that there are a lot of things that have those numbers inside chasing arrows. You might have noticed we didn't talk about numbers and chasing arrows at all during this presentation, because those actually, they have meaning, but they don't have the kind of meaning now that they used to have for recycling. There are other places in the state and other places that will say they only take number 1s and 2s plastics or something like that. But we take all number 1 through 7 in our district. And if you start getting hung up on the numbers, then you're going to start to see all kinds of things that don't go in the bin, even though they have those numbers on them. Styrofoam is a great example. If you look at the bottom of a meat tray, you're going to see a number and a chasing arrow symbol. Styrofoam is absolutely not recyclable in Vermont. So just remember to use the chart we showed you and think about, okay, I've got these plastic air pillows. Well, is it a container or is it paper? No and no. Boom, doesn't go in the bin. And it's actually that simple. So I hope that helps. And you go ahead, Amanda.
The next one is lids of tin cans. They're sort of 2 by 2. Sometimes I put them in the bottom of tin cans so they can be crushed and then crush it up so it's inside so it doesn't fall out.
I'll take that one. Maybe you can follow up. So 2 things is I sometimes do the same thing, but they really aren't 2 by 2. I used to think because it's 2 inches on 2 diameters because it's a circle, but they're just so thin, I think they do fall through. So I would put them in the bottom of the can like you've been doing. If you live in central Vermont, we can take small metals at the ARC, and that's the place Amanda talked about. You have to check out our website, cvswmd.org, and there's a button that goes straight to the ARC website, the ARC page right on the homepage. Yeah, so I have a little bag in my kitchen where I just save all my small metals, and every now and then I bring it to the ARC, and we combine them all into one big metal container and bring it for metal recycling. But if you aren't doing that, then either get them into the bottom of the can or they're too small to go in your recycling.
All right. The next one, do the plastic caps have to have the same symbol before they're screwed on? I noticed some do and some don't. Some caps appear to be made from the same plastic as the bottle and don't seem to be but seem to be a different kind of plastic. It's hard to tell. So again, you don't really need to worry about the numbers. Very typically, plastic bottles and plastic caps are made out of different materials, and it's fine to screw those back on.
Yeah, and that's kind of like an older way, like about 4 or 5 years ago, that changed where they used to say, don't put the plastic lids on. And so it's taken a really long time to sort of retrain everybody to like, hey, you can do that now. And the reason you can do it now is like they updated some of their sorting machinery at the MRF so they can handle those now.
All right, and the next one was another numbers question, which is just if they mean anything anymore. Do the recycling numbers mean anything anymore? And they do mean something. I mean, I believe it's just what type of plastic it is. It just doesn't necessarily tell you whether or not you can recycle it.
Oh yeah, they have meaning, but they're mainly designed for manufacturers. And honestly, we used to hand out we had a flyer that was all about the numbers and what they mean. We don't hand that out anymore because it gets people really hung up on which plastics are which in the numbers, which is interesting and it's fun to nerd out on that, but it doesn't affect what should go in your recycling bin. Is it a container? If it's a container, is it a glass, aluminum, steel, or a hard plastic? It's all you need to know. You don't have to worry about the numbers, at least in this area. If you're logging on from somewhere, that's not in our area, then you might want to check with your recycler, wherever you drop off your recycling, about that.
All right, and then Kathy has just linked the plasticfilm.org recycling link, so that's great. Yeah, you'll get that later on as well in our post email. Re-paper food containers. How does one tell if it's plastic coating? I think the box sticks of butter that come in the frozen food boxes. So I'm assuming you're talking about like the shiny kind of glossy paper boxes. Those are fine to go in your paper, in your recycling. The boxes that like are the butter boxes. The wax paper that goes around the butter is not. That needs to go in the trash. But I think she might be talking about like the frozen food boxes that like used to be banned.
Right. Yeah, that's another thing that changed right around the time, at the same time that they said you could put your bottle caps back on the bottles, they started taking the frozen food containers. We're more talking about, like, when I talked about the paper food containers, I was thinking of, like, sometimes there's a local store where I would get like a takeout salad or something, and it looks like a brown board box, but it actually has a plastic lining inside the box. But your butter boxes, your frozen food containers, those are all broken down and processed as boxboard.
All right, and then the next one is, are the big clear plastic salad greens containers considered rigid plastic? And they are in our district. I know that there's some places that don't take them, but I believe,
Oh, we take, yeah, you can put
yeah,
those.
we take them. I do know that there's some areas that don't, but
Okay, we're just gonna speak to our area.
yeah,
but
but here we do. So
I'm gonna take George's question.
Mhm.
George, I think I saw that, you correct me if I'm wrong, but you logged on a little bit, like in a little bit after we'd gone through a big part of the webinar. We did spend pretty much the bulk of the webinar talking about what happens to recyclables after they leave your house in Vermont, and where they go, why they get recycled. And it all boils down to that the recyclables are a valuable product that gets remanufactured. In Vermont, our materials go to domestic marketplaces, and they're not getting dumped in the ocean. Now, that said, we at Central Vermont Solid Waste Management District are not monitoring those. But we're in touch with people at all various levels in the state and in the industry, nationally and regionally, who are recycling. And the bottom line is, people are selling the recyclables and they get revenue from it, and that's how they keep their facilities running. There would be no money in dumping them in the ocean. And the other thing was, I did address that question sort of came up in some national news, like National Geographic and NPR. And even though I'm actually consume the news from both of those places pretty regularly, they did not get the recycling story right. And a lot of people think all your plastic gets dumped in the ocean. That might happen. It doesn't happen in Vermont, and it doesn't happen everywhere. And the recycling market's on the upswing right now. And I hope that you'll be able to see the recording of the webinar and catch that first half hour, because we go into that in a little bit more detail earlier in the webinar.
Mhm. I just want to mention that a good way to make sure that your plastic like isn't ending up in the ocean is to make sure that you are putting it in the right place.
Yeah, you mean like not contaminating your recycling bin. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. I'm really glad you asked that, George, because actually that is one of the main reasons we have this webinar, is because a lot of people think that. I actually want to just see, I'm trying to figure out if anybody has a question they want to ask, just unmute yourself and raise your hand, and we'd love to like see your face and hear your voice if there are any other questions. I'm just trying to figure out if I can, yeah, can we do it from here? Okay.
Okay.
Well, I guess I'm not, I don't know if we made it too hard to do that. I just would love to like, oh, someone's got their hand up. Annie's, so, okay, let's see.
Hi there.
Turn on, hey, can you turn on your video, Annie?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so my question, and thanks for everything you do. I'm trying to do the best I can with this. It's been really hard. So I have two questions. One's probably very simple. So what if you can't get the whole label off of a can or a bottle or something? You know, I try my best to take all the labels off as much as, but you know, sometimes it just stuff like gets stuck, you know. I've heard that can be a problem because it's mixed, but
It's not a problem, actually. That's that, even though we've been talking about contamination and mixed materials, the labels aren't really an issue for metal cans the way they used to be.
what about bottles or
It's
bottles?
okay. Yeah, I wouldn't,
Okay.
don't worry about the labels.
So my main question would be, you know, as great as all this is, one problem I have is that, you know, in the communities here, like a lot of people that just, you know, they don't recycle because there's so many things to do. There's so much to it. And they don't know, and they're not going to like tune into something like this. You know what I mean? What do we do in that case? You know, when you consider so many people that just, you know, it's too hard, you know, they're not going to do it.
Well, we're hoping that not just in like having webinars, which we realize isn't an accessible or interesting to everybody, that a lot of the other stuff we do does capture people's attention. We've been really trying to make the messaging simple, which is break it down into those two categories. Is it paper, which encompasses paper and cardboard, or is it a container? And if it's a container, is it glass, aluminum, steel, or hard plastic? If you can remember that, you can recycle right. And then the other pieces just don't add anything else into your bin. And we realize there's the 2x2 rule and all of that. That's also really important. But the main thing is those two categories and nothing smaller than 2x2. And if you stick to what's on the list, it should be fine. It's just, we do a lot to get that message out there. We realize we don't hit everybody. You know, we just need more people. We do it. We're part of a whole statewide effort on this front. And it is something that's really simple, but also really complicated. And it's a hard thing to reach everybody with. If you have any ideas, email us. We'd love to hear them.
Yeah, and a great way to also like reach other people is if you know, try to be an advocate for recycling yourself, you know, talk to your family and, you know,
Well,
people you know around.
I do as much as possible. Of course,
Exactly. So
with this going on, I don't really see much of anybody. But
yeah. But
I post information on Facebook and whatnot, try to get
Thank
people, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. Thank you for doing this.
Sure. Anybody else, just like raise your hand and we'll prompt you to turn on your video if there's any other comments or questions, clarity. All right, well, we'll give it another minute. And in the meantime, you will get a follow-up email from us. And, you know, Amanda mentioned a bunch of the stuff you'll see in that follow-up email. So, you know, you'll get like the link to where the product stewardship page is. So all of the information is in one page. There's a recycling flyer that you could print out or share with people and a few other resources. And we have the follow-up survey. Please take it because it helps us. I just posted it again. It really, really helps us to make this better. We want to see, how you guys, what you learned, and if there's anything we can do to make it more interesting or better in the future. Philip says, thank you. No worries about coming in late.
Liza did raise her hand.
Oh, somebody raised their hand? Awesome. Let's see. Okay, hold on, Liza. Okay, I'm asking you to start video. I think that means you could go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks. This has been so great, and it's answered a lot of questions I've had. And yes, definitely the things that were true 6 years ago, I've been doing diligently and wrongly for 6 years. So now I'll do them correctly. But so just what you mentioned a little bit ago, that you're looking for more partners and things. Is it possible to request this presentation for a certain organization? Like, I work at the Unitarian Church of Montpelier, and we have 250 active members, all very avid recyclers. And I think if you guys would be willing, we'd be thrilled to have you offer this.
Oh yeah, definitely. We used to do this only in person, and we would a lot of our time was spent responding to requests. We do lunch and learns for businesses. So sure, you should have my email address when you get your follow-up email from us, and just contact us privately and we can set up a way to do that.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, did I see another question come in, or we might be done? Okay.
Nope, I think we're all
All right,
set.
we're all set. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Earth Day. Enjoy the snow. Let's pretend it's winter for a day. It'll be gone hopefully by the weekend. And take care.
Bye.
Thank you.